Good evening, Chirag and Shona, and welcome to Design Dialogues hosted by Rethinking the Future in collaboration with Publis. This is your host Bhavya, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Chirag and Shona, the visionary partners of UCJ Architecture Environment. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Just to give a brief introduction about your firm, UCJ Architecture and Environment, founded in 1961, integrates India's architectural heritage with innovative design solutions. Specializing in institutional and educational projects, the firm creates user-focused, contextually relevant spaces. Notable works include University of Jodhpur, Indira Gandhi Institute in Mumbai, and Naya Raipur Capital Complex. Your studio design emphasizes cultural narratives while addressing modern needs. So, before starting the questions, I would like to inform you that this interview will be published on the website of Publis. So, sign up on the Publis website and you'll get the access to watch this interview. So, shall we proceed with the questions? So, question for the day. Could you elaborate on how your studio, UCJ Architecture and Environment, reinterprets and adapts ancient Indian building traditions to meet contemporary needs?
I think most importantly, it starts with having respect for tradition and also the humility to kind of acknowledge that there is value in it, and then recognizing context, learning from that, and taking it forward in a contemporary way. I think that's where we start, and I think these are the values that help us take tradition and still keep it contemporary.
I think the attempt is that as you move forward and as you kind of want to build for the future, I don't think that you can build without the context of what has happened in the past or where you're coming from. So I think it's very important that your work is informed by the past and built for the future. So I think in that sense, we try to kind of reinterpret traditional or ancient fundamental values and not really kind of just mimic them into a modern setting or a modern built environment.
So, moving on to the next question. How did the idea of modeling the bus shelter on tree branching emerge, and what inspired this biometric approach in your project Bus Terminus and Market Complex that is in Goa?
So I think my father had a book on some of Fry Otto's works, and there's some images of a model that he had built where the entire roof was supported with similar columns come trusses. And I remember seeing that book in my childhood, and maybe perhaps subconsciously that memory has stayed with me. And when we were building this bus terminus, everybody talks about the cliched language to use today is infrastructure. Unfortunately, infrastructure doesn't have a very architectural connotation to it. And when we built this terminus, we thought that, we should make sure that the built environment that we create still, in a sense, is very transparent, very light, associates with nature. And this structure, Fry Otto's manner of doing these supports for this roof, came back to my mind. And I think we were able to weave it in very seamlessly into the design, and it kind of really enriched the end product, the built form. That's really where it came from.
So, reflecting on the same project, what design or technical insights did you and your team gain that will benefit future infrastructure projects?
I think what happens a lot in India is that although we are racing ahead with technology at one level, when we get down to the brass tacks and when we try and get things built, dealing with the contractors, dealing with the laborers, it's still at a very fundamental, very crude level where people are not using or not willing to use technology in the same manner that perhaps we are able to do sitting in the office. So I think what we realized is that a structure like this, which is, conical tapering columns, and each branch of the column keeps reducing in size, I think it became very important that the way this is to be constructed also needs to be thought through at a design level. And unless you are able to get the design built with the tools that are available at site, but still addressing your architectural priorities, I think we would fail if we didn't address that at the very outset or a little into the process. Because otherwise then it just doesn't get built and no client wants to be stuck in that position where your ideas are not built or you can't build them with the implements which you have at site. I think that's something which we really learned, that we need to adapt designs as high tech as they may appear to be able to build them with the crudest of implements or resources available at site.
So, with projects spanning from different regions, how do you tailor your designs that suit the best for local cultural and environmental context?
I think for us, there's certain planning principles, there's a certain work ethic, there's certain design sensibilities that just don't change. And I think that remaining context constant, it's the context that drives the development of design, but within the framework of those planning principles or those ideologies that we try not to veer too far off from. So, whether the project is in Himachal Pradesh or Chhattisgarh or Goa or Gujarat, I think our sensibilities, our priorities, our principles, we try to work with those and adapt to context and then work with climate, user, the environment, the land, the terrain. I think all that drives how we articulate those principles. I think that's where we find the shift, but not in the primary principles or ideologies.
I think also what happens is that the vocabulary changes from region to region, geography to geography, project to project. But the fundamental principles really remain as a constant throughout.
Moving on. For your project, Lata Mangeshkar Kalangan draws inspiration from both local Goan traditions and the work of Rabindranath Tagore. How did you balance these influences to maintain a cohesive design language?
So I think the Lata Mangeshkar Kalangan was originally conceived as a Rabindra Bhavan. So that's actually, in a sense, from where for us the association with Tagore came. By the time the project was inaugurated, it got rechristened as the Lata Mangeshkar Kalangan. But I think primarily it remains a cultural center for us, and any cultural institution needs to be a thriving place where people have the opportunity to meet each other, to greet each other, to interact with each other, artists with common man, the common man with the common man, artist with artist. And I think those exchanges which take place beyond the auditorium, or they have classrooms which are for practice in dance and music, I think that was extremely important for us. So what's really driven the project is the sense of public space, the vibrancy of Goa, as well as if you study Tagore's paintings, there's a certain dreaminess, there's a certain aspirational quality to those, and I think that's what we try to bring into the design.
I hear and I've read a lot about your firm and your work. So I hear a phrase that is called man is the measure in your design philosophy. How did this concept shape the spatial experience for this project?
So I think for this project and for all of our other projects, I think what always kind of remains a constant. So if you look at the typology of projects, if you look at the geography of projects, each typology is different. Each project is different in its typology, in its geography, in its scale. It's a firm which is now spanning more than 60 years of practice. So even the context of technology has evolved. But I think the constant really for us has been the human being and the human scale. And that's not changed. And if we keep that as a constant and we make the design people centric, then it works well for us in a school, it works well for us in a cultural institution, it works well for us We designed some years ago the Capitol complex in Chhattisgarh. So it's a really monumental project, but we tried to keep the scale of the building something that even tribal folk could relate to. And I think I see that happening in projects across the board, that we need to kind of keep the human experience prime and at the focus of all of our activities.
So, given the rapid development in architecture and technology nowadays, how do you envision your studio adapting to the future design challenges?
So I think this technology that drives how we work, and there's technology that drives how our work is executed. I think there's two levels of technology that we're always talking about and grappling with. The first one, I think we have, that's, or rather, maybe even both of them. It's an ever evolving process and it will never stop. And I think it's important for all of us to remain on that treadmill and keep upgrading ourselves, keep renewing or relearning how we approach things based on that technology, whether it's softwares, whether it's technology on the ground. But I think we can't be overwhelmed by it. I think we, continue to hold on to certain skills that we have learned or developed historically, whether it's even modes of drawing or modes of building. I think we keep looking back and then taking steps forward. And I think that's what's important, to keep bridging between the two and yet continue to move forward. And that's how you remain relevant. You can only remain relevant if you continue to find ways to keep up with any kind of progression and yet be able to bridge that.
I think also I saw a big shift in our practice, or a big challenge of sorts in our practice, when my father had been working on the Jodhpur University projects since the mid 1960s up till then, for the next 30 years till the mid 95s. And he was then commissioned to work on a project in Mumbai where L&T, they were construction giants by then already, and they were the co-owners of the building and co-client. And the projects in Jodhpur were all stone masonry built by hand. The most traditional craftsmen would build those projects. And then we were building for L&T in Mumbai, and the technology available and at our disposal was completely different, So I think to be able to kind of see, in a sense, our practice successfully address both contexts, both technologies, both techniques, was really kind of inspiring, to say that you can still maintain your fundamental principles and work in different contexts, geographies, time zones.
In reference to your project, Sri Tirupati Balaji College of Arts and Commerce, what were the key challenges you faced in balancing vernacular traditions with modern educational needs?
So I think that project taught us to kind of bring many things together. It was a project that drew from Vastu. It drew hugely from the climatic conditions. They're very extreme heat, cold. It's just between Gujarat and Rajasthan, so a lot of heat there. But also, I think there was the idea to recognize the aspirations, very fast growing rural areas where education, I think, has become a very important aspect for all those families, and students coming from several kilometers on foot or on bicycle or by bus. And these are really rural areas that we're talking about. So I think, and also there's the aspect of labor. So when we say vernacular traditions, it's not just in terms of design or planning or insulation, it's also about execution, materials, using earthen pots as insulation on the ceiling. So I think, and yet giving them a building that is something that's aspirational, something that continues to draw people from all over. I think that was an interesting exercise to kind of marry all of that.
So, given the emphasis on sustainability for this project, could you elaborate on the role of recycled tiles and double walls in reducing energy consumption?
So I think materials like recycled tiles, whether it's coming from landfills or from other construction sites, waste, debris, that's a brilliant way to kind of bring material back, complete the circle, reduce wastage, reduce, our landfills are tremendous. So if this is something that's going to cycle back into construction, then of course there's nothing like it. In terms of things like double walls, that's just the most simple, basic, low tech way of reducing consumption of power. And it doesn't get simpler than this, it doesn't get more basic than this, and it does the job that maybe other high tech materials do. But you don't really need it, especially in a context where this construction is possible. And there are no other limitations to kind of prevent you from doing that. And its performance is tremendous. So I think these are great and simple ways to, save whatever we can.
Actually, I think also that in India, a vast majority of our population doesn't have reach to technology and the resources required to kind of work with technology. So I think, and we have a wealth of low tech knowledge and practices, which if we can implement them into our contemporary buildings, infrastructure, whatever you call it, I think there's a lot for us to gain and save as a nation. And I think this whole drive in terms of smart technology or technology driven, electric gadgetry driven solutions is a bit unfortunate or a bit misplaced for the vast majority of the country. It may work in cities, but not uniformly throughout the country.
So, moving on to the last question for the day. How do you perceive the role of project documentation and publication in shaping the architectural field today? Could you also share an example of a particularly complex project that you have undertaken where through documentation has played a very crucial role and later gained a very important visibility through publication?
So I think documentation and publication has two aspects that you're touching upon. I think first, for us as architects, it compels you to collect your thoughts, articulate them, reflect upon them, and that also helps you and guides you in your way forward. So I think that's one aspect, and I think that's a very important aspect that sometimes in our kind of very rushed existence, we sometimes forget to do that. But I think it's important to be able to look back, to reflect, and it helps when you document and you publish. And I think maybe taking one of our projects, which is the Shaurya Smarak in Bhopal, I think in terms of complexity, it came about by the nature of the project, the number of consultants we had to involve, the different kind of materiality, scale, all of that brought about its own complexity. Also brought us to realize how many hats the architect really wears. And it's almost like you're the ringmaster in a circus, and you're just kind of pulling everyone together, making sure it all works, making sure everyone speaks to each other. And documenting this project was an interesting one because I think by creating drawings and writings, publications after the event, you also think about that whole process and what you've been through. And I think this is one of the projects that also got a lot of visibility because it was inaugurated at a certain time by certain people. I think it is through documentation and publication that, this happened.
I think when you work on a project, you kind of work on it with an intuitive sense. And when you finish the project and you kind of step back and look at it, and you kind of document the ideas that kind of were at various points important or defined various elements in the project, and then you try and put it together. So I think you can also then look at it in isolation. Each element, you can look at it as a collective whole and then see what happened to the project. So I think we are seeing that in multiple projects, that this idea of documenting what you've done and kind of looking back actually really informs us or guides us in terms of what was successful, what was not successful, what can we do better, or what are the common traits between projects which we did, let's say, 10 years ago and that we're doing today or that we might do in the future. We see certain, all these issues that we're talking about in terms of responding to different climate, technology, etc. We see how some of these are also evolving across projects. I think documentation is very important. I don't think you have to set aside time and effort to do that, but I think it's extremely important that you should do that.
That was the last question for the day, Chirag and Shona. Thank you so much for giving a precious time. It was a pleasure to have you here, and don't forget to sign up on the Fabulous website. Thank you so much.